Silence my phone.
I think we're live. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the individual co-hosts and do not reflect the official policy or position of the Firearms Radio Network and or their employers. Viewer discretion is advised. This is especially true on live shows. If you like what we're doing and would like to help support the show, visit patreon.com/afteractionproject. If you'd like to throw us some free support and appreciation, we'd greatly appreciate a 5-star review on iTunes. Tonight's episode, just like every episode, all the episodes last year were brought to you by nobody, is brought to you by the Firearms Radio Network. Be sure to check out the other great podcasts on the Firearms Radio Network by visiting firearmsradio.tv. Tonight, we are joined by John Murphy of FPF Training, and we are going to discuss his concealed carry, street encounter skills, and tactics course, and anything else that the conversation might bring to us. If you haven't joined us in the past few years, man, we really do appreciate you guys sticking with us and jumping back on, hanging out with us tonight. Feel free to get any comments or questions that you have. Get those going down there in the comment section, wherever you're watching us, Facebook, YouTube. Share this out with your friends, family, loved ones, those enemies, frenemies, anybody that you care to bother with a good time. And Andy, what have you been doing over the last year? Before we get into the show, what have you been doing over the last year? You haven't been working the mute button. Judson, thanks for joining us, man. Hey, we are live. Judson, we are live. Thanks for jumping on with us, man. Glad we were able to get you in here. Andy, the mute button's at the bottom of your screen on your microphone. It's somewhere. Talk to us about what you've been doing, any training classes you've taken, attended, what shooting you've been doing, and how the hunt for primers is going.
Man, it's been a year of craziness, as we all know. And I've done quite a bit. I got COVID. I survived that. That was a pain in the ass. And, we've been out shooting a lot, teaching classes. Let's see, been out with Tim Herron a couple times. Tried to go to Tom Givens Range Master, but unfortunately got COVID then. And so decided to reload this whole year, learning how to do that. And, yeah, primers, that's a thing. It's not easy to find anything right now. But luckily, I started kind of early in COVID, and I was able to get a little bit of a stash going. So I think that part's good. But I'm glad to be back. I'm glad to see all you guys. That's for sure. Judson, what have you been up to?
I've just been doing the same old. I've been hit just as hard as everybody else has as far as COVID goes. For those of you that don't know me outside of this world, I'm a part-time middle school teacher here in Pagosa Springs, and we've been in school, out of school, in school, out of school, in school. It's just been a mess for the last year. I teach special studies there, so I'm kind of a substitute, if you will. And so my job has been kind of thrown up in the air because there's not a lot of electives that people will join Zoom on. So it's been it's been good though. This last year, I'm just going to bury it in the dirt. And, I'm trying to do some new things in my life. I'm trying to change some things in my life. And I've been teaching a lot ever since about, let's say, October of last year. I finally just said, screw it. I'm just going to start putting classes on the books and start teaching again. If they show up, they show up. If they don't, they don't. And ironically enough, my classes have been pretty full the last 3 or 4 months. Just lots of new gun owners, lots of new folks out there that are trying to find training. So, it's been okay. 2019 is gone. 2020 is here. And as far as the ammo situation goes, it's going to be a year or two. That's all I can say. Everybody that I've talked to in the industry says at least a year, if not 2, before all this starts to normalize again. But to stay out of politics, I'll toss it back over to Jeremy.
Yeah, man, the hunt for ammo. I almost got excited about 1,000 rounds of a 9mm for 50 cents today. I said, I better not do that, man. I better not do that. Luckily, I have a couple thousand rounds, which is hardly nothing, but it should get me through the training season. We were able to get some ammo set aside and stockpiled for our students going forward. John, talk to us about the state industry from your perspective. You are newly on the road full-time trainer, bringing FPF training across the lower 48. And then what's new in your world, and how was 2020 for you?
Well, 2020 was a challenge. And And even knowing that, I kind of set a date to work toward retirement to do this full time and pursue the passion. As far as the challenges we face, I would characterize it as the best of times and the worst of times.
Yep.
A lot of new owners seeking training. Conversely, the ammunition situation, as we discussed, isn't getting any better anytime soon. What I'm hoping to see, though, is it will force instructors to maybe look at the ancillary skills that go along with the concealed carry lifestyle, rather than just 25-yard burning down those B8s and the 1,000 round a day classes. I think it's going to be a while before we see those again. But I'm looking forward to getting out there and making some progress, I hope, and filling in that what I perceive to be a void in most concealed carry training, and that is it's always the gun. It's always the gun. And if you are an acolyte, as I am of Claude Werner, and his negative outcomes, you understand full well the downside of that mentality.
Yeah, I've just started working B8s recently at 25 yards. I'm not doing 1,000 rounds. I last year I was fortunate enough to get out to Tom Gibbons, his handgun instructor development course. That was about 850 rounds, a class that I'd been meaning to take for a while. So finally, Andy actually set it up, and then he got COVID, or so he says. I think he was just scared to get outshot by me on the range. I was coming back. Him and I took a Masad Ayub class the year before. Andy outshot me in most of the other class. He knew I was coming for him, and I was going to beat him in that class. So he faked COVID to get out of it and spare himself the embarrassment. John, talk to us a little bit about the your concealed carry street encounter skills and tactics course, who that class is for, and I guess before who the class is for, talk to us about the required gear. How much ammo am I going to need to bring to that class? Do I need to have 4 mags, 5 mags, a racing rig, all that good stuff?
The class itself is meant to fill a void in skills that people need to have. I mean, a typical concealed carrier. They decide, okay, I'll buy a gun, and they'll buy a gun. They'll seek minimal training, and consequently are ill-equipped mentally to deal with many situations. The course itself is very low round count. It's not much of a, what am I saying? 250 rounds, and that's all on the second day. The first day is I beg, borrow, and steal bits of curriculum from other people with full attribution. We talk about stopping bleeding, and I got a lot of that from Caleb Causey and Greg Lefferts, as well as my military and government training. We talk about application of pepper spray, and I borrow heavily from the legendary lawman Marshal Chuck Haggard for that one. We do I call them street encounter skills. It goes beyond what what Craig has instilled in me with his muck. Craig Douglas, managing unknown contacts. I want to go a bit beyond that. I talk about managing emotional contacts, and what you say, and how emotional states can be very transitory, and it's just amazing what you can see, what you can say, and the result you may not get what you intend. I'm sure that we're all still shocked if those who have seen it, the video from the infamous snow shoveling incident in Pennsylvania. That was ego on display, and it just turned as ugly as it could possibly get. So we do that for a full day, and then the second day we introduce the gun to the scenario, and we work that. We wend it in there with we move our mouths, we move our feet, we engage our minds before anything else. I have a variety of novel stimulus to get people out of the holster safely and on target at practical ranges. For us, that's 7 yards and in. If we apportion our time, and I'm all about that B8 headhunting, I really am. It's a lovely skill, but if you have to allocate time, we have to go toward the more likely scenario, and that's a much closer range interaction which violence may occur with or without warning. So we have to have skill sets and tactics, techniques, and procedures to deal with both those eventualities. I'll capture people the time it takes for them to perform a given task, be it employ a pepper spray, slap on a tourniquet, create distance, or if need be, I call it hearts and minds, which is my take on a failure drill. So we'll have in our mindset, we will know how long it takes for us to accomplish a given task. The next big thing then is I discuss is timing, and that is when do we apply that task. And my goal is I want people, if they know they have a 1.5 second draw or presentation, I don't want them to try to execute a 1.5 second task in a 1.2 second window. And that's the point I like to keep driving home. Throughout, I integrate interaction with law enforcement. We stop bleeding. We do witness management skills, what to say, what to do. And it's essentially to fill the void between a basic concealed carry class and an advanced shooting curriculum.
That's awesome. That's it's great to see and hear about a class that brings in some of those skills that are often overlooked. I would probably say 99% of the time overlooked, even with students that take a concealed carry class. I don't know how many folks realize what would actually go into a defensive shooting situation in the moments leading up to it, in the actual execution of presenting your handgun from the holster, making the decision as to whether or not you need to shoot. After you made the decision, obviously that you need to get the handgun out of the holster. And it's kind of surprising. I don't want to say surprising. I'm not surprised by it, but it's interesting that this class in this format seems to be outside of what is normally offered by firearms instructors. Can you talk to us a little bit about why you think that is, and the motivation for you to create this curriculum and develop this curriculum and bring it to students across the country?
Absolutely. A primary goal or motivation of mine was market differentiation. There is a long line of shit-hot shooting instructors out there, many of them from former special mission units, many competitors, and they all bring a big slice to the game. At the other end of that, you have the actual requirements of an armed citizen. I've had numerous students when mentioned to me after the course that, holy cow, I didn't even know what a pre-incident indicator looked like. Before the class starts, I have like 3.5 hours of YouTube of me beating my lips on various topics. And by far and away, the most popular video is criminal pre-assault indicators. If you can see it coming, I want to give people the capacity to use what the dear departed William April would call, would seek an off-ramp. A big fault people have is that they will admire a problem as they see it coming. And that kind of negates the whole idea of having, forewarned is forearmed, if I can borrow from my former employer here. So recognition without action is worthless. So my training, my class is designed to prompt appropriate, decisive responses, not reactions. A reaction is you get whacked on the knee and your leg moves. I want to have responses that are kind of in the can, so when the template unfolds, and these things they have a certain pattern to them. From the hello, how do you do, polite exchange, to the hey MFer, you're in my parking spot, and all points in between. The other thing I discussed in the video view ahead series, it's a 45-minute segment, is the perilous pitfalls of third-party interventions. Many people new to carrying the concealed carry lifestyle have this delusions of grandeur that they can swoop in to save the day like Dudley Do-Right or the White Knight and they don't recognize, well, there are severe consequences to that kind of involvement, not the least of which being you can end up dead. One of the examples I use, it was a jewelry store robbery in Texas at one of the box stores, and this guy sacrificed his life for that corporate entity in front of his wife and kid. It was just not worth it. At the same time, I make the point that if you establish a boundary, there are certain things myself that I will not abide witnessing. But I make that a fully informed decision based upon studying the problem, and that's backing up to the worldview of the course. It's about the problem, and most people just don't quite grasp the nuances of the problem.
Hey, John, yeah, you mentioned about people just not paying attention. A quick story that I had, I was getting off work this afternoon, pulled up to my street because I parked my vehicle out in the street, and I see a lady. She's talking to my neighbor, and she has her dog on a leash. Next thing you know, I see this big dog running straight towards them off a leash, full force. And I roll down the window and I'm like, "Hey, ma'am, get your dog. And she turns around at me and she goes, "What are you talking about? My dog's on the leash." And I said, "Ma'am, look, there's a dog coming your way." And she goes, "But my dog's friendly." And I said, "Oh, no." And at that point, it was like, I don't know what to do anymore. But it's just even as something as simple as that people don't pay attention. So what are some of your tips and tricks that you talk about in your course that you drive this home to where, we always hear about this situational awareness and personal awareness, but do people actually utilize it once they leave the classroom? And I hope they do. So what are some of your tips and trips that you get them to kind of to focus on that?
Well, the big thing is to relate to them that they're people too. And they are subject to emotional states. Attention zooms in, attention zooms out. But everything that we do, well, we're all broadcasting constantly. And I want to make people cognizant of it. It's where they are, who they're with, how they're dressed, can all influence or impact the situation. Now, when we have someone observing us from a variety of perspectives, either from a predatory perspective or for social interaction or just taking in the scene, we have to take into account what that person's got going on as well. The big thing, though, the tool I've used for some time is just showing people video of average everyday citizens getting involved with notice or without minimal notice or no notice in violence. It's called. There's actually years ago I had a class, and in the class has become a dear friend of mine, a cognitive neuroscientist from Johns Hopkins. And at the end of the course, she watched my presentation, all my videos. She said that she very much appreciated my incorporation of recognition prime decision making in my class. And I had no idea what the hell that was. But essentially, when we witness things, it's a form of vicarious experience that we're taking on board. John Correa is doing a magnificent job with it in his channel of active self-protection. He has taken it beyond anything I could have conceived, let alone executed. Great perspective, and he's done a lot of good work. And it shows what happens to average schmucks who look up and there's a gun in their face, or they find themselves engaged in a simian monkey-level poo-flinging contest, and holy shit, someone's just pulled a knife. I mean, who could have seen that coming? You have to break it down and relate it to people that this is you. In fact, I won't give away the game, but I have a manner of driving that home at the very outset of the class. And it has resonated quite well. And I've had very positive feedback from a variety of students that hit me up and say, "Hey, John, thanks. Universally, I saw it coming. And that for me is, if my students can avoid a thing, that is the epitome of win."
Yeah, I think that's it's one of the things I used to tell our students that, hopefully you look back on your life in 15, 20 years and you realize you think that this class was a complete waste of time because you never had to pull your handgun on somebody. And when I first started doing this, there was a story here in Albuquerque where these group of individuals, they were targeting women as they left a movie theater, and they would stick a gun in their face and take demand their purse. But they were looking for women, specifically women who were leaving the movie theater that were on their phones. They weren't paying attention, right? And I said, hey, if having taken a class and having some situational awareness, you don't realize it's not like a seatbelt. If you get into a car accident and they're like, man, that seatbelt saved your life. It's not like that. It's how many people walked by those same criminals and didn't have a gun stuck in their face because they were paying attention to their surroundings. None of those women that they did not choose that day or those days realize that. They don't know, right? They didn't realize that just looking up, not having their face down on their phone potentially saved their life. And I think, if a good class, good training, good mindset goes a long way to do that for folks. Talk to us a little bit about, now you said this is to fill the void. Is there a certain skill set that students need to have prior to attending this class? Do they have to have a concealed carry license, or do they have to have taken a concealed carry course, or what kind of student or what skills does a student need prior to signing up for this class?
Essentially, the minimal entry is someone they had to have had formal training in producing a pistol from concealment. I can't stop a line, and I now will have a disparity of skill sets in any given class. But I just can't have that guy that I can't afford to turn my back on. And I have refunded people. Hey, this wasn't what isn't for you. Ideally, though, now that I'm on the road, in years past, I would fly in and roll into the class. Now I'm driving my RV Maslow to the range a day or two before the event, so I can, if people will hit me up, I can get them up to speed before kickoff on game day. But the big thing is that they can actually pull a pistol out of a holster, and more importantly, as we all know, put it back in the holster without adding any holes into their body, because that's the tricky part in most of these classes.
Yeah, that's the scary part. It's like, hey, look at this sticky holster. It's like, oh man, don't look at this, and they try to jam it back in there, and it's like, oh my gosh.
Here, let me put my gun back away as they pull the thing apart to put it in my coat.
Yeah, it's like, hey, the best $15 holster you ever bought, right?
Or the hybrid holsters with the sweat shield, the leather that loops over, which requires that they take the muzzle, shove it into the leather, and then down into the holster. Thereby, if they do blow a hole, it will be a guaranteed through and through shot. It's just never a dull moment.
Talk to us about the gear. So they need to have a holster. How do you work through the holster selection and making sure, if I were coming to take that class, how do I know I have the right holster and the right gear for that class? What do I need to bring with me?
Sure. Any appropriate. I prefer pistols over revolvers. Handgun. The holster itself, I am one of those. I don't allow retention holsters with the finger-driven release mechanism. To borrow a phrase from Ralph Nader, those things are just unsafe at any speed. And while I just dated myself pretty massively, but moving on, a good sturdy belt. You can't go far amiss. Magazine carriers are very helpful for a class. So I recognize many people don't carry spare magazines, but it helps facilitates the flow of the course. 250 rounds, preferably factory ball, but at this point, beggars and choosers. Though I'm sure we've all attended classes where the guy brought I make my own, and they always run 100%, and it's just like watching the Titanic set sail. As you know, they get really good at malfunction courses by the end of the day, and an open mind. And what I'm really appreciating, my students now, a wide variety. Many of them are very accomplished shooters, but recognize they have a void, and just talking with people and seeing it coming. And the more novice shooters can come with a plethora of life experience. I've had people that worked overseas in very high crime countries, and I learn more from them sometimes, I think, than they learn from me. and they bring something else to the game as well. They don't yet possess the hard skills that we want, but they are our legs, our head and shoulders up in the soft skills that maybe more accomplished shooters haven't acquired yet.
Yeah, that does make sense. I can tell you there's a couple of classes, even Jeremy and I teach in concealed carry. We've had a couple students throughout the years, not often, but even they're kind of questionable. And it's almost like, we can learn from that student there just by kind of watching what he does, and not in a good way, because it's just the general public sometimes. And you can't really choose who you pick for a concealed carry class. And I hope they get everything from it that Jeremy and I try to bring on. But sometimes my first class I took with Jeremy, we've talked about it before, is the guy was asking like, hey, well, if I get in a drive-by shooting situation and I can, I can shoot out the window down the street because my homie, blah, 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 blah. And the whole class is like, oh God, we're all going to die. We're just going to die. But he's the student that I want to actually learn from, because he's the guy that's out there that you got to watch for.
And get him dialed down. We've all had the student of, well, can I shoot now? Can I shoot now? Can I shoot things? And they'll scenario what if scenario you to death. And when in fact the parameters are very stark and very defined. And if you are performing within the reasonable man standard, well, then you'll be much less subject to malicious rephrase that. Much less subject to prosecution. Everyone can be subject to malicious prosecution. And I think that's definitely becoming more and more of a thing.
Yeah, I think that's Go ahead, Andy.
Go ahead, Jeremy. I was going to say, do you think the reasonable man standard legally is not changed, but do you think it has morally with people?
Well, that's a can of worms, pal. It really is. I've taken classes, obviously, from Masayu, and there's a guy up right now. I've been reading him since I was like 16 years old, and I'm 58 now. So that is a guy that who was built the pyramid upon which he stands astride. I've taken Andrew Bronco, various other law classes, and if you watch prosecutions across the country and what is happening, it's almost like self-defense is being criminalized. The standard is being raised, and we all know that in the final analysis, the actual validation of an impending attack is the attack itself. And then the subsequent use of force, and you have just got to be absolutely justified. We're seeing a whole genre of district attorneys and prosecutors out there that are bringing cases that less than 5-6 years ago would not have seen a courtroom. And I think it's another part of a cultural shift we're witnessing.
Yeah, it's interesting how that can get overlooked. Is it's a reasonable man standard, but as Andy mentioned, does that standard change? And how much of that is dictated by the political climate? I think at the local level, it can be heavily influenced by the political climate. Especially with the DA deciding whether or not they're going to pursue charges and everything that can fall out from that. How does your course either address that or get your students on the right path with their mindset to seek out that knowledge and that understanding?
I integrate that into the class. Oh, Winter Dog, what's up, buddy? The mindset has to derive. It has to be the reasonable fear of death or serious bodily injury. It can't be like, hey, you're looking at my girl. That's my parking spot. You pissed me off. It just can't be that. And from that event, we have to seek every available off ramp. If you have read Andrew Bronco's book, The Law of Self-Defense, 3rd edition, he has the pillars of self-defense, and one of them is reasonableness. What you did reasonable, proportionate. All that has to be baked into the cake, and it all has to be part of a decision-making process that begins with training that recognizes that there are consequences to even touching a pistol in public, and that the level of scrutiny that you'll be subjected to in this legal environment is such that you just can't half-ass it. I mean, there's an internet theory now that if you draw to a ready and not point the muzzle at someone, I've seen this in several forums, that it is not really assault. Oh no, that's aggravated assault in any jurisdiction, and you're going to take the ride. And that's something else we have to fight as instructors, is the level of disinformation. Both willful disinformation is part of a marketing practice, and disinformation predicated upon absolute ignorance.
Yeah, that's unfortunate to see, but it does pop up constantly where it's, folks are, I don't know, bestowed upon them a position of authority or expertise, and then now they're spouting this information that could potentially land people in prison or jail for a considerable amount of time. And a lot of these folks are putting it out there on social media and in their different platforms, and it's taken at face value, and it's as if it's the law the way that it's actually written. It's one of those things where it's almost, how do you filter through it? You see folks on social media, they'll jump in a training related group, and they ask for legal advice, and then you get 4 different answers from 4 different people, and it's laughable, because I'm like, yeah, the best place to seek legal advice is on Facebook. That's what you.
Dieting advice, relationship advice, legal advice. Yeah. Facebook is the fount of all knowledge.
Yes, yeah. I'm like, oh man, this is nuts. And it happened here locally a couple of years ago with a guy. He was in a shootout, and then like the next day after it happened, he was on Facebook seeking legal advice. I'm like, dude, I think Andy was like, man, deactivate your account, get off the internet, call your lawyer.
Yeah, if I can use an acronym, STFU.
Yes,
in a big way.
Winner.
People don't generally, they don't appreciate it. I work with a young man from Indiana. He was at home cooking for his wife who was coming home. He heard her pull in, and he thought, wow, dinner's going to be ready. I'm going to be husband of the year. The first indicator that he had that something was wrong was he heard her scream. Went outside and witnessed his neighbor. The neighbor was beating his wife, the neighbor's wife. He went back in, armed himself, came back out, and it just turned into a flaming shit show, resulting in this guy having to kill his neighbor. And it was only at that moment he recognized, holy cow, it transpired it was actually defense of a third party. Pardon me. And as he sat in the police cruiser, contemplating that he had just mortgaged the next 25 years of his life, and as well as the well-being of his family, on what he did, and the time it took for him to, he just acted. He had no cognizance beyond the moment. And as it turns out, he did exactly the right thing. The district attorney actually arrived on the scene and said, this guy's not going to be charged. And how often does that happen? But the stark realization of realizing your training void, you want to do that before an incident rather than after. And the void and everybody is something that most people don't appreciate. And I've no doubt got one myself, because those damn B8s, man, at 25 yards, they haunt me.
It was I hate B8s. I don't do much with B8s. I'm more of I like instant gratification, so I'll throw up a clay target and then I try to bust that from 25 yards from concealment. But for me, it's one of those things where it's 3 to 5, 7, 10 yards. I felt pretty confident in my skills and abilities, so I pumped out to 25 yards, man, and they really just went away.
Distance increase, distance and deviation. It just takes a little bit, and you're way the hell off. Yeah. So as I make my point, distance demands deliberation, and it really does. Those quick quick and close shots we like to pull off. That's well and true, especially if we're incorporating movement into the program. But you gotta bear down in that front sight or absorb that red dot. Now I guess is the way for those 25-yard shots.
Yeah, dot is definitely life. I had a question about the class. What is the most difficult thing for the average student in that class? Like, what's the most, not necessarily difficult, most challenging?
Absolutely. When I get people moving their mouth, and then having to move their feet, and then maybe move their gun, move their pepper spray, or just create space, getting those rehearsal down. It's a task overload, and I have to be very monitor very carefully because I don't want to crush anyone. And leave them with the boy, I suck syndrome, because I don't want that either. But they need to have an appreciation that they need to do all these things. You can't multitask; that's a myth. But you can task sequentially much quicker. I will use the I'm so old. The computer in the lunar module in the Apollo program. It was hardwired. It would do like 8 things. But it would do all 8 things in such a sequence that you thought that it was all simultaneous. No, it was sorting and sifting and tasking in a fashion that it got us on the moon and it can get people home. The multitask myth is exactly that, but you have to have a sequence and be able to run through it.
Yeah, it's incredible how difficult it is for somebody to present their handgun and say stop or leave me alone or anything else. And then do you find it harder for students to verbalize commands and shoot, or present as they're moving? What do you think? What are your thoughts with that?
Just this past weekend at my class in Homestead, I had a lovely man. It took me a while to impress upon him that this wasn't a shooting class. And that he had to respond to the stimulus in an appropriate fashion, and that can be a thing too. He had been to other training, and in previous training, every time he pulled a pistol from a holster, he shot. Well, I have a method by which I will, I will change the stimulus, as it were, to where you have to almost abort a draw stroke on the way out, and that is meant to emulate or simulate. The target perspective has changed. This guy's gave it up, or he's become otherwise compliant, or he's just running away. And we want to avoid that shot in the back, if at all possible. Recognizing that there's sometimes the action-reaction loop is just so tight, it's unavoidable. But then that's also very defensible if you are appropriately trained and have the right witnesses for you in the court. But back to the thrust of the question is getting people to accept that there's more to it than just stroking a pistol out of a holster and going to work.
Well, that's not as fun as blowing through 1,000 rounds over a 2-day course.
And I suspect I will not be the first guy to go bankrupt selling people what they need, not what they want.
Yeah, that's a difficult thing, especially in the industry. Do you feel so when did you first start offering this course?
Well, it's been iterative over time. Several years ago, I called it Street and Counter Skills. And I gave a class last year at McLeod, Oklahoma, and I sought feedback because that class was called Advanced Skills and Tactics. Because in order to sell a class, you have to have the word advanced in it. Am I lying? No, I'm not. And this class impressed upon me that the way the curriculum was structured and presented and its relevance, that I need to kind of revert back to street and counter skills. So I call it street and counter skills and tactics. Because there are certain tactics we can employ, verbal, less lethal that all. So there are. It's a tactic is meant to influence someone one way or the other to gain position of advantage. So that's how it came together over time, and as a student myself, as I would acquire more skill sets and backing away and looking at the problem people face, I thought, well, there really should be a platform, a venue, as it were, for someone to come out and get the analogy I use, a Neapolitan scoop of all these skills. If you're an ice cream fan like I am, you got your Neapolitan ice cream with your strawberry, your vanilla, and your chocolate. Well, my class is a scoop across the top of all that. You get a good taste of verbalization. You get a good taste of stopping bleeding. You get a good taste of the law, and you get a good taste of applying, the handgun for ballistically and anatomically effective hits. Go to other classes with Caleb Causey or of Lone Star Medical, and there's numerous other great people out there, and dig down deep into that medical skill set. Take Moss for the legal bit. Greg Olefritz, Craig Douglas, Paul Sharp. I mean, there's, as I mentioned earlier, it is the best of times right now. If you're a student seeking training, it's never been better than this. But bringing it back home to the most important thing, which is, of course, me, he says quite jokingly, I thought that the market really would benefit from a class that offers this. And my first taste of this actually was with John Farnham on this in 1995. I just left the Marine Corps, and 96 actually, and it just blew my mind that you would actually talk to somebody rather than just shoot them. That had never occurred to me. Of course, when you're raised with the locate, close with, and destroy mentality, of course it was mind altering. And then John called it talking to Goofy, and then Craig has subsequently expanded it and deepened it with his managing unknown contacts curriculum. There's just so much to know, and if I view this class as a survey course, and it gives one thing I've heard a recurring theme in the after actions has been, now I know I need to do more of this. Because before I didn't even know that was a thing. So I call that a win.
Have you seen an uptick in interest or, student enrollments in the class?
I'm just now becoming a thing, I think. I'm getting website traffic is way up. And thanks to podcasts like this, I'm getting more exposure and frankly, some validation. Right now, I'm pretty well booked through end of March, but you're only as good as your last fight. So I have to start thinking about my venues in April. And if people are interested in that, they can go to fpftraining.com, hit the link of FPF Training on the Road, and I have a really cool map with all kinds of icons where I'm going to be going this coming up. I think it's 35 venues across the country.
That's awesome, and that's just between now and March.
No. That's the whole year. I leave. Next up, I'm south of Savannah, and then I'm Okeechobee, Florida, and then I fly to Phoenix. I come back. It's northern Georgia, Louisiana, and then Austin with Carl Wren at KR Training, then TACCON with Tom, then Beaumont, Texas, Bland, Missouri, Martinsville, Indiana, back to Culpeper. McLeod, Oklahoma. I mean, I've got the whole thing pretty much down the road, but I'm all over the country to include the West Coast, Firearms Training Academy of Seattle, and then a venue in Los Angeles.
That's awesome. We had, I think it was Ben Davis that we had on. We had him on last year, and I believe he had taken your class. One of our guests had taken your class, and they could not stop talking about, in the pre-show and the after show, how awesome that class was. So it's definitely, I wholeheartedly believe that you're filling that void. And it's awesome to see that class is offered, but it's offered by somebody who has the breadth of knowledge, experience, and expertise to offer that, right? It's not somebody who watched a bunch of YouTube videos, got his NRA cert, and now he's offering this 3-day tactical tactical boot camp for folks where they're going to get, half-ass stop the bleed instruction, half-ass defensive handgun stuff. It's one of those things where when Andy was reaching out, and when we were talking about getting the show back on the road, it was your name is highly regarded within the industry, and you definitely have a reputation that is well deserved and earned. So it's one of those things where I'd like to see more of this stuff offered in the industry, but I don't want the industry to destroy what this class needs to be. Does that make sense? Right? Because I think our industry does a great job of keeping things free. So there's very low barriers to entry in some things. But it's one of those things where, if folks are seeking out training, make sure you're seeking out a qualified and reputable instructor, somebody who knows what they're doing. At the beginning, if you're jumping on now, at the beginning of the episode, John had listed off, where he had gained the knowledge and the skills and the ability to teach this stuff to his students. And it wasn't, hey, I watched a bunch of YouTube videos, or hey, I read a book. It's something that you've developed over the span of your career that's allowed you to take this stuff on the road. We have a couple questions. We have Stephen Martinez is asking, what are John's tactics on avoiding a gunfight? Much thanks. Stephen, thanks for the question.
Well, Stephen, the first thing I'll do is I'll default to Master John Farnham's dicta, and that is, don't go to stupid places with stupid people at stupid times and do stupid things. It is amazing how sedate your life can be if you follow that. On the other hand, some people have just got to push that envelope. The big thing is recognizing that any conflict that you get into, if you're a concealed carrier, any conflict you find yourself in is an armed conflict. There is a gun present there. And if you take a Tom Gibbons class, he will make you raise your hand and sight that you'll forget you even have a gun until the situation absolutely warrants it. So keeping your ego in check, and I would go so far as just don't be an asshole. Gain that social goodwill. In any given situation, be the guy that holds the door open, fetches the odd drink. If you knock somebody's drink over, apologize profusely and sincerely. Mind your tone and your vocabulary. I mean, the difference between excuse me is so powerful that the same three words, or same two words rather, but the way they're presented can be enough to put somebody over. Another thing, you just don't know what kind of day someone is having. And I know that in Northern Virginia, the shortest amount of time known to man is between when a light turns from red to green and someone lays on the horn behind you. Well, there are numerous. Well, people are doing their internet Facebooking things. I got that. But you just don't know. That little horn blast can be just the cherry atop someone's miserable shit Sunday to set them off. And I'm not saying don't do it, but just be cognizant that your actions can have a reaction beyond what you intend. But the big thing is just to follow the Farnham rules. And if you take John's class, and I really recommend doing it, he would say things like, if someone were to say to you, were you at the office party when the cops came? Nope, I left just before that happened. Were you at the beach when the big brawl broke out? Nope, I left just before that happened. If you're paying attention to the dynamics, you can see it happening. And it's time to leave.
Right, so I have a listener question. It's kind of, we're rolling back about 10 minutes. But I have a listener question from a good buddy of mine. His name is Colton Miller. He is the owner of Miller Defense Industries and a great instructor, awesome guy. His question is, and I quote, shouldn't the commands of stop or don't come closer happen prior to the deployment of a firearm? And it's in my professional opinion that the only thing anyone should hear once that gun comes out of the holster is the report of shots. Any handling of the firearm as a deterrent often, I'm sorry, my messenger is whacked up, often result in brandishing, menacing charges against an innocent individual. So that's kind of a kind of an iffy question in our realm, because I know for a fact there are several people that are either watching on or will watch this podcast has actually cleared their holster without firing a shot. What is your opinion of that?
I will both just agree and disagree with Colton on this one. Pardon me, I've got strong opinions on both ways on this one. Absolutely, that managing that distance, stay back away from me. Look, man, I mean it. I don't want any of this. I'm manifesting the physical, the physical signs. My verbalization matches that. And if I'm gaining compliance that way, that's fine. If, however, I've got 2 or more people approaching me and they split apart and they're starting to flank me, I call it the fan. These people are fanning out. Well, they have a disparity of force advantage on me, and by they're ignoring my verbal first request and demand, continue to encroach. They're communicating to me eloquently their intent. As we believe Professor Kleck's statistics, that there are over 2 million defensive firearm uses in this country every year, not involving a shot, merely the display. That's where I would disagree with Colton, that there is utility in that regard. However, I will also concur, you have just very much entered the legal realm. And this is why CYA becomes critical. And that is going to be, can you articulate what you did and why you did it? If in the totality of circumstances that you can do that, it's also a very good idea to win the telephone game. Though I've heard it, which is you are the one to call the police, saying I was being aggressively encroached by these individuals. They were manifesting pre-assault behavior, as shown, as which I've learned via various venues. Have that copy of that venue on you can point to. So yes, I drew to a retention or a low running position and verbally reinforced my command. And we've all heard stories. I mean, the NRA magazine is filled every month with the armed citizen stories. And whoa! This is not when people are bent upon predation and are presented with the reality that they made a dramatic miscalculation. And frequently that will manifest itself in the form of a handgun that's presented by surprise from concealment. And that is still very legally defensible.
So John, do you recommend actually using verbal compliance, or is just if it comes out, it's going to get used, whether it's used in stop, I have a gun, or if it's used in bang?
All right, I'll give a prime. Sure, let me. I'll give a prime example. It took place in Florida about 2 years ago. And John, in fact, I use the example in one of my videos online. You had a gentleman who was a self-employed handicap parking enforcer, and you had someone who was parked in the spot, and he was giving this woman. She was sitting in her car. He was giving this woman the what for, the how to. Her husband, common law, I believe, came out of the store, looked over, saw his woman being harangued, and with no further thought, went over there and shoved this guy to the ground. Down he went. Our intrepid hero got to his knees, pulled his pistol out, and you can almost see across his face the vexation. The guy, upon the sight of the pistol, the guy, I believe, went, whoa. I don't want any of this. And that you can almost go, 1 potato, 2 potato, 3, pow, and he shot. Mortal wound in the chest, the guy staggered off. And subsequently, he died. It was mortal wound. But I can tell right away that man, whatever limited training he had, he envisioned any time the gun came out of the holster, he was going to shoot. And subsequently, he took a 15-year prison sentence, and I believe he's already had his first prison beating, and there's more coming. Now, I watched that trial. I caught the closing arguments. And the prosecutor himself said, at that shove, when you were in a position of disadvantage, he was entirely within his right to produce that pistol to stop that assault. And you achieved that end. And then you crossed the line, pressed that trigger, and inflicted that mortal wound. And then subsequently got what I believe what he had coming.
Yeah, the question for me, it rings in going back to the kind of the beginning of this conversation when Jeremy spoke and you spoke, John, about a lot of the misinformation that goes on Facebook. And that's one of the old wives' tales of anytime you draw your firearm, you better shoot. And, the way I kind of explain it is if I draw my firearm, I have to be willing and understand the mindset that if I have to shoot, I will. Not I'm using it as an intimidation thing, but I also have to understand that if the situation changes, which is kind of what you teach in your class, if I'm incorrect, or if I'm correct, is if that situation changes, the gun comes out of the holster, guy drops the knife, he runs away. We have to understand that our mind has to switch back to, okay, the firearm is now no longer needed, and we don't immediately just shoot. So I think that question just kind of, to me, borderlines a little bit of that old adage saying that if I pull my firearm, I have to shoot somebody.
Yeah,
And
I agree with you, Andy, 100%. I totally agree with you.
It's heuristic completion. And that is, heuristics, the decision modeling. And I've always done it this way. And it's always worked for you this way in the past. Well, there's sometimes when you apply that mindset methodology, it ends profoundly poorly. And that guy, he's still got 13 years in the slammer as a result.
Yeah, the way there was a discussion that I had with somebody, and it's the moment the threat of death or great bodily harm ceases to exist. That's the instant that your justification for using deadly force ceases, right? Like you could walk up on somebody, he could stab three people, kill 3 people. You can witness him kill 3 people. He drops his knife and gives up. You are no longer justified in shooting that guy, right? Just because that case, I followed the commentary around it on social media a lot because it was not surprising, right? But if we were to take like a 30,000 view of the firearms training industry, what would be surprising to somebody on the outside is that there was so much divide and disagreement, and there was one side that thought it was justified, and there was another side that and for me, I was of the opinion, and apparently the jury decided it as well, or I don't know if he took a plea agreement, that he was absolutely not justified in pulling the trigger when he pulled the trigger. But the fact that there were so many folks within the industry that are out there teaching and training people how to use their handgun to save their life that thought that he was justified was, I guess, a bit scary because it's like there's, again, the moment he was shoved or had he drew his handgun and the guy approached him, continued to approach him, that's a different story. But you can see in the video, he does the thing, right? I give up. You won this. I'm done. I am no longer a threat. And then 1 potato, 2 potato, bang is one of those things where it's how do you, you're teaching people, like people are looking to you as the expert, and you're going to be telling your students that was a justified shooting. It's just not surprising, but a bit scary.
John, I've got another listener comment that I'd like for you to respond to. Will Stevens says, pulling the gun can be a deterrent too. Just because you draw should not commit a person to also pull the trigger. 2 separate decisions, 2 separate actions. I think that's kind of segueing off of what Andy mentioned, as well as what you and Jeremy were just talking about. So what are your thoughts on that? Because I actually did pull my gun on I was in a hotel room. I had my headphones on watching a movie, and I had my pistol on my hip. I was laying in my bed, middle of the day, and I was watching a movie. And all of a sudden, I saw something in my peripheral vision, and I drew my gun out of my holster because I'm in a hotel room, right? I mean, nobody else should have access to this room but me. And I drew my gun, and I set it like right next to my thigh, kind of covered. And I looked up, and it just so happened to be the one of the ladies that comes in and restocks your little mini fridge. And I immediately threw my gun under my leg, knowing that the decision to pull was no longer, an action versus a reality. So what are your thoughts on that?
I think Will nails it. That was very, very eloquent, and I may end up using those words with or without attribution. I hope he doesn't mind. The bottom line is use of force is a methodology of de-escalation as well. And if you are in reasonable fear of death or serious bodily harm, producing that pistol and not shooting is if you are in fear of death or serious bodily harm, you produce that pistol and did not shoot, and yet you secured yourself, then you're well within the boundary of the law. But that again, it can't be. I felt threatened. It has to be that reasonable man approach, and that standard has to be met.
Yeah, articulation is very important.
Yeah, so I've taken a class. I took a class a while ago, just when I kind of hit on that point where you said, the reasonable. You can feel threatened, but is it a reasonable threat? There was a gentleman in class that was, he had internalized a legitimate fear for himself that he was going to be the victim of the knockout game. You guys probably remember when that was popular. All the kids were doing it, right? He had a legitimate fear of being the victim of the knockout game, being punched one time, and then that assault, that one punch causing him to die. And he had asked this instructor, it was the class that I had taken with Andrew Bronca here in Albuquerque a few years ago. And, he brought this up a couple times, and it was one of those things. It was like, regardless of the legality of it, if that's a legitimate fear that you have, I think our students should take the things that they're afraid of and recognize how they can create a buffer zone for that, right? So that the only thing that's left is a reasonable fear, right? Would a reasonable person be afraid that this person approaching them aggressively on the sidewalk was going to walk up, punch them in the face, and cause them to die, and that's why they pulled out their handgun? Well, no, a reasonable person wouldn't fear that, right? That's not a reasonable fear or thought that the person on the jury is going to have. So what we need to do, is we need to reduce our scope of fear so that the only thing that is left is something that a reasonable person would be afraid of, right? Somebody approaching them aggressively on the sidewalk that presents a knife, right? So what are your thoughts, and how are you preparing your students in those, where it's not a shooting class, but what are you doing as an instructor for your students to kind of get them to think about the gun logically and not just, hey, I'm going to go burn down 200 rounds in a day at a class?
That can be a challenge, particularly with students that have attended a lot of shooting classes. It has to stem from the basis of absolute necessity, and it has to be incorporated with a group of other skills, interwoven skill set, and that's what I'm trying to impart to them, that this is a potential answer, but it has to be to the right question. I'm fond of saying, we are, if every problem is a nail, and we all carry a hammer, but if you hammer a screw, a screw problem, you're going down. It's a very, many people are I'll point it to the less experienced shooters are more amenable to it. The people who came for a shooting class are more difficult to catch that nuance.
I feel like that question is going to be redundant. I was going to ask who should take this class, but it's I'll answer that question for you. I think it's anybody who has the audacity to carry a gun around on their person every day, thinking that they're going to save their life or somebody else's life, right? You might not use the word the audacity to do that, because I think that's a reasonable decision that most people should make, right? But it is a little bit, right? There is some audacity there, because it's how dare I think that I have the skills and the abilities to save my life or the life of somebody else. So it's this, I think I would like to see more students realize, right, the seriousness of that. Would you agree that it's probably anybody who carries a handgun?
This is a highly consequential lifestyle decision. We are carrying with us the capacity to instantaneously end a life or lives. if we embark upon that course of action, ours will be forever changed. That's and beyond just the legal ramifications, but the social stigma that will be with us for the remainder of our days. And that's kind of what I'm driving home to people, that we need to take a holistic approach based upon a rational assessment of what fears, what threats we face, and that reality. And the newspaper is usually a sufficient intelligence report for you to see what's happening in your neighborhood. Like I don't have to worry about a flying hatchet attack from Spetsnaz troopers. I do, however, have to be worried about someone encroaching upon my space without trying to engage me in conversation. Like, hey, can I have $1? Can I ask you a question? Can I ask you a question? And people are not equipped for that, though they have a gun. The ability to, like, this guy really is in fact assaulting me, but I don't think I have a rational fear of death or serious bodily injury. So I'll pull up my palm dispenser and give him a face full of misery. But then again, I've just used force, so I have to be able to, to articulate why I did that. As I'll point out, these skills have to just mesh together, flow through a problem, the pre-problem, the problem, and the post-problem, of which it can be, very painful. If we are subjected to legal scrutiny, I think that the process can be the punishment. Just that they will be so the powers that be will be so upset with one of their proles actually having to use your term, the audacity and the temerity to actually act in their own self-defense with some kind of a weapon, be it firearm or pepper spray, that they will run people through a ringer just to hurt them. People need to understand that that's part of it. And then when I zoom out, when I close out, I'll say, I really hope I did not burden you with too much thought. That when everything is dissolved away and the actual problem is before you, I hope that this doesn't cause inaction by analysis. But these events, when they're melted away, there's very little ambiguity, and will call for a decisive response. And that, by the way, that response can be just walking the hell away, folks. It can. You can decisively walk away.
Yeah. That's one of the things where we've had a few students through the years where they've expressed the reluctance after taking the class, right? They were excited about taking the class, and then after the class, they were like, I don't know, this is a lot of responsibility. And somebody had commented earlier about not carrying most of the time. The law is not in our favor when it comes to defense. So there are a lot of, I think people have reasons for not carrying a handgun, right? Not carrying their concealed. But what do you say to those folks? And how do we get them to understand that, yes, there's a lot of responsibility and the consequences can be grave. And if you do make a misstep, you're potentially going to spend some time in jail. But the alternative to that is death or great bodily harm. How do you kind of get people to accept that?
That is something everyone's going to have to come to grips with themselves. I see Will's comment there, and I get it. If you're raging pissed off, and you still feel compelled, like you have to go outside and interact with society, well then, if that is your emotional state, that might be a good choice. But as Tom would say, we don't get to pick the day. And I think it's incumbent upon us to maintain a very circumspect approach to life, almost a touch of stoicism, if I may. That it really is. It isn't a big fucking deal. What you think is a big fucking deal probably is not really a big fucking deal. And laugh at yourself a bit and pick yourself up and move on, because when that moment does come about, when that day, which starts with family and friends and laughter and love, when it turns suddenly dark, there is no substitute. There just isn't.
Well said. Before we wrap, what are those skills that you think the concealed carrier should have? And I have a sinking suspicion that these skills are going to be covered in this class. I know you covered them at the beginning of the podcast, but we do have quite a few more listeners now at the end. So what do you think those skills should include?
Number one is know yourself. Have an honest appraisal of who you are at any given moment. Understand that everybody has buttons and switches and levers. And some people are buttons, switches, and levers are more exposed than others. And some people are just expert at pushing those buttons, flipping those switches, and turning those levers. So you have to know what your zone is and maintain that proper comportment. You got to know yourself. You have to understand what the threat really is. And it's all the way from polite social interaction to multiple assailant robbery and many points in between. And you have to apportion your time to acquire the skills to deal with all that. Dale Carnegie course would go, how to win friends and influence people would go a long way for many people's lives. We have to understand the consequences, legal, mental, moral, physical, of violent interaction. We have to have the ability to stop bleeding when it happens. And that's pretty much what my course is wrapped around.
Awesome. I love it. Andy, any final thoughts for our listeners?
First thing, I just want to thank John for coming on. Your course is really interesting to me. I like the idea of not even touching a gun day one and getting into all the other nuances of actual concealed carry. I think we need a lot more of that as far as instruction. Everybody wants to go out and shoot, but nobody wants to think. And I think we need some more thinking involved. But my final question, I always like to ask a phooey question, John, and that's a freaking useless information. And so now John is out in the RV. He's retired-ish. What else does John like to do other than shoot and teach people?
John likes to read military history. I just finished a book on Tim Fish and Iron Men about the U.S. Navy's torpedo development between World War I and World War II, and how it existed, and I will call it an echo chamber of excellence. And how on kickoff on game day, they foisted an absolute piece of shit upon the American fighting man. They were bouncing torpedoes off the side of ships for a year and a half into the war. The war lasted longer as a result of these guys couldn't think outside of their bubble that we are the best and brightest. Anything that would come out of our factory has got to be perfect. And in fact, it was a steaming pile of turds. Great book. It was both illuminating, having just left the government, and depressing at the same time, having just left the government.
Nice. Those are always the best.
Yeah, John. One of my favorite sayings. A friend of mine who's a police officer here.
Oh, I think we lost Judson.
Judson, you roboted out on us.
His claim to fame, as far as like quotes or sayings, is "think outside the holster."
Whoa, that's pretty darn tasty. I might have to find that with appropriate attribution.
Yeah, you should steal that, because when he said that, it really made me start thinking about stuff.
That's like Yo Quiero Taco Bell, think outside the bun.
Yeah,
kind of thing. I call it skills beyond the gun, but that is a much catchier way of phrasing it.
Who said that, Judson? You kind of roboted out when you said that.
Say again.
Who was it that said that?
His name is Preston Ray. He is a Durango police officer that works in our school system, and he does. Whenever I go into the schools around here and do run, hide, fight and active shooter training, he always accompanies me because he is the school resource officer around here, and he's the guy that always has a gun, always has a knife. Always has that backup, but he also understands that we have to think outside the holster.
That's awesome. I love that. It might be part of our intro. Awesome. Well, I appreciate you spending time with us, John. Looking forward to hopefully getting out there and taking that class in the next few months or in 2021 for sure. When are you going to be in Phoenix?
Holy cow. I think it's the 27th, 28th of February. I'm in Phoenix. Let me go through the whole thing. Next weekend, I'm in Midway, Georgia, and then it's Okeechobee, and then it's north of Atlanta. So then I fly. So yeah, I think it's 27, 28.
What about Carl Wren's place?
Carl Wren. Oh, now you're putting to me, man, at the very end. I'm coming. Check the website.
Yeah. Check fpftraining.com. I'll do the same in just a minute.
If only there were technology that would allow us to keep our
Is there someplace we can go to see all of your training events?
Yes, there is. fpftraining.com. And hit my YouTube channel. I just put some content up tonight. And factor in the first 3.5 hours of concealed carry street encounter skills and tactics is all YouTube-based video.
That's awesome.
Go ahead.
Interesting.
Is it your YouTube channel is FPF Training as well?
FPF Training as well.
And do you do any social media stuff?
I have a very flaccid Facebook account, and old man has a hard time with Instagram. But I've got to get better, or I'm going to fail.
No, yeah, you're doing great. Just keep doing what you're doing. I'm looking forward to getting out there training with you this year. We've heard good things from other instructors that have taken that class. So we're looking forward to definitely getting in there ourselves. I think it's the pepper spray, the stop the bleed stuff. That's all the pepper spray I haven't done any of. Stop the bleed, I've done some of that stuff. But it's one of those things where, more time in a classroom learning that and is better and definitely beneficial. So definitely looking forward to training with you. Great having you on the show. Anytime you want to come back on and join us, feel free to reach out. We appreciate everybody spending some time with us this evening. Remember, it's your life, it's your safety and protection, it's your responsibility. Stay safe, and maybe we'll see you again in 2021.